Former Prime Minister of India, Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji once said, though you can change your friends, but you can never change your neighbors. So therefore, maintaining peace and tranquility with neighbors is always essential. And it has always been motto of India as well as through its neighborhood first policy. And in line with such kind of a thing, we recently saw that Minister of External Affairs visited Sri Lanka to help Sri Lanka in the times of economic crisis that Sri Lanka is now facing. So guys, in this video, we are going to discuss that how recent visit of MEA to Sri Lanka can help Sri Lanka to secure the IMF bailouts that Sri Lanka is negotiating from so many of the months, and what are the new memorandum of understandings that have been signed between India and Sri Lanka, and how this particular move is a feather in India's neighborhood first policy. Well, hello everyone, my name is Sahil and this video is going to be very important for our GS paper number 2, International Relations, India's neighborhood policy. Now, let's start with the video. So recently, we saw this thing that Minister of External Affairs has visited Sri Lanka, okay, and it is a clear expansion of bilateral engagement with one of India's most important maritime neighbor. Now, when we talk about India-Sri Lanka relations, guys, the relations between India and Sri Lanka are more than 2,500 years old. The relations have been cultural as well as spiritual, as Buddhism influence reached to Sri Lanka from India. And both the countries have also shared the colonial history, as both the countries were ruled by colonial masters, and during that time a lot of Tamilian people were also taken to Sri Lanka to work on plantations. Moreover, both the countries also achieved independence at the nearly at the same time. Now, when we talk about Sri Lanka and India, the relations between both the countries are intellectual, cultural, religious, and linguistic interactions have been there between both the countries. Now, we have seen that recent trends between India and Sri Lanka relations, they are largely marked by close contacts at the highest and political level. For example, recently Minister of External Affairs is visiting. Then we also see that the growing trade and investments have also increased in the last few years between India and Sri Lanka, particularly for infrastructure. Then cooperation in the fields of development, culture, okay, all these things are happening. Moreover, Sri Lanka is also important in for India, so in order to keep China at bay. Okay, so broad understanding on major issues of international interest or is also a synergy is also trying to be achieved between India and Sri Lanka. So these are major themes that are right now prevalent and in between India and Sri Lanka relations. Now guys, the recent visit of MEA comes in the time when Sri Lanka is facing the worst economic crisis in more than 70 years, to be precise, 73 years. Now, we are going to understand the crisis in Sri Lanka first of all briefly. But before that, guys, I would like to briefly tell you about Unacademy's UPSC CSE GS courses. So why to enroll in Unacademy? Because you here have widest choice of educators, flexibility to change your courses, unlimited view on the lectures, dedicated doubt solving sessions, printed comprehensive notes, end-to-end preparation, mentorship sessions, and daily live answer writing practice sessions. You can enroll in plus as well as iconic course, and you can use the code Sahil29. You can use the code Sahil29 to avail instant 10% discount. You have wide options vis-a-vis subscriptions are concerned. You can take 12-month subscription, 18-month, 24-month, 36 months. So you can learn at your own pace. And now Unacademy has also come with UPSC iconic week offer, where if you enroll in 18-month subscription, first of all, you get immediately 10% discount by using the educator's code, and you also get a complimentary optional subscription free of cost. You get a optional subscription free of cost. So it leads to huge saving of around 46,000 rupees. So you can enroll, and this offer is valid till January 21. So you should hurry up. Now, moving on, guys, in this particular direction. So Unacademy has also launched NCRT courses, where 120 hours of structured classes on NCRTs will be taken, where NCRTs from 6th to 12th will be covered. You can enroll in that, and for your full-fledged preparation, expedition batch, which is going to be a completely English batch, has been started, where India's top educators are going to take classes for you. and all these courses are available at 0% EMI option. You can give a call at this number, and the team will guide you for the bare minimum formalities that are there. And now Unacademy is also coming offline, and you can see that India's top educators are going to conduct the sessions. Fine. Now, moving on, guys. So we were discussing as how and why economic crisis began in Sri Lanka. So guys, first of all, understand this thing, that on economic front, Sri Lanka is facing the worst crisis in last 73 years. There is food shortages, there is high inflation, forex reserves have depleted. Okay, even Sri Lanka is not having the money to pay for essential imports such as the fuel and all such kind of commodities. Even the food shortages have become so critical that it has turned in a humanitarian crisis. Okay, because of, now I am going to discuss it in detail just in few minutes. And because of the economic crisis, which introduced then humanitarian crisis, and this humanitarian crisis now have even induced recently the political crisis, where the protesters, they stormed the government buildings, they forced the top leaders, president and prime ministers, to step down. Okay, so this is something which has happened in Sri Lanka. Now let's trace the reasons behind this entire crisis, why it began. So first of all, guys, we can see that, first of all, guys, the seeds of the crisis were sown, first of all, in so many of the years of economic mismanagement that happened in Sri Lanka. What were the immediate precipitating factor? So we saw this particular thing, that in 2009, Easter attacks, okay, Easter attacks, blasts were carried in Sri Lanka. In this particular incident, there were hundreds of fatalities that happened, and it impacted Sri Lanka's tourism to a large capacity. Now understand this particular thing, Sri Lanka is largely dependent on tourism, from where its foreign exchange comes, okay, and a lot of livelihood is dependent on tourism. It got impacted. Then guys, what has happened? Moreover, in the last few years, we have seen this particular thing, that Sri Lanka had continuously borrowed a lot of money. Large unsustainable debts have borrowed by Sri Lanka, majorly from China. And because of that particular thing, Sri Lanka was not able to service these loans. And because of that particular thing, Sri Lanka entered into the state of default crisis. Moreover, country's foreign reserves also got declined into the last few years. Why? Because I told you, number one, that after the Easter attacks, after the Easter blast, tourism declined, and because of that, the forex that was coming, it went down. Secondly, guys, what had happened? COVID-19 pandemic led to escalation of the crisis. Because of COVID-19, China's exports of rubber, tea, etc., what they were doing, it went down. But at the same time, the imports that were coming for Sri Lanka, they were continuously high. Okay, so what has happened? COVID-19 pandemic impacted tourism, impacted the major exports. Okay, thousands of the laborers of Sri Lanka who were working in West Asian countries, these laborers, they were stranded, they faced job losses there, and they were not able to send the remittances. So remittances are not coming, exports have dried, tourism is not coming. So Sri Lanka's forex reserves started to went down. Moreover, at the same time, guys, we saw this particular thing. At the same time, we saw this particular thing, that that Russia-Ukraine crisis also began last year. Fine. And because of this Russia-Ukraine crisis, Sri Lanka again got impacted hugely. Number one, Sri Lankan tourism, largely Sri Lankan tourism, it constitutes Russian and Ukrainian travelers. So as they were not coming through, the tourism impacted. Second thing, guys, that happened here, because of this particular war, oil prices went high, and large maximum energy imports of Sri Lanka's energy is imported. Okay, and because of that, Sri Lanka has to pay even more forex for import of essential, for the import of natural gas, for the import of oil and other essential commodities. Moreover, Russia is also the second biggest market of Sri Lankan exports. So from all the fronts, Sri Lanka got impacted by the Russia-Ukraine war that started. Then agricultural policy, ill-conceived, ill-planned agricultural policy of Sri Lanka is also something which is to be blamed. Now what happened? Abruptly, government of Sri Lanka announced that they are going to become completely organic farming based nation. And fine, what happened? Just fine, suddenly they banned imports of chemical fertilizers. Fine, now this particular thing happened in just a very sudden kind of a manner, and because of this particular thing, what happened? Agricultural production in Sri Lanka declined. Agricultural production in Sri Lanka declined. Moreover, with the Ukraine war, food inflation increased. Their own domestic production declined, food inflation increased. It aggravated crisis in Sri Lanka, and economic crisis, food crisis began. This is something that has happened. Moreover, at the same time, years of mismanagement, as I told you, years of corruption that was going on. Okay, moreover, the populistic policies of government, fine, where the government had promised large number of freebies to the people. Government has reduced substantially the taxations. Okay, it has made Sri Lanka as a state fiscally very weak, and it all came to the fore in present times. So this is something that has happened. Now what India has done, okay, what type of aids have been provided by India in this particular context? Number one, guys, India had provided assistance of around $3.8 billion to Sri Lanka. Nearly $4 billion of assistance has been provided by India to Sri Lanka, which includes the line of credit, which includes the currency swaps. Fine. Now, the aid that has been provided has been food aid, financial aid, fuel supplies have also been provided. Okay. Now, the issue that coming is here is that basically, guys, see, over the last few years, we have seen that the Sri Lanka had come closer to China. Sri Lanka has come closer to China. We see this particular thing, for example, Hamban Tota port has been given to China for a 99-year lease. Recently, a Chinese surveillance ship was docked in Sri Lanka. India raised its apprehension, but still Sri Lanka gave permission to the Chinese ship that it can dock in Sri Lanka. Fine, so we see this thing that often Sri Lanka's activity has been inclined against India, but still India showed this thing that how a responsible neighbor behaves. Okay, now coming to the present issue of IMF bailout. Now, what is this IMF bailout all about? So, guys, understand this thing that now, as Sri Lanka is facing economic crisis, as Sri Lanka is defaulted on many of international payments, Sri Lanka is in balance of payment crisis. So when a country is not able to pay for its imports, fine, when their forex reserves have completely been depleted, then the situation of balance of payment crisis emerge. Now in this crisis, IMF fine can help a particular country. For example, IMF helped India also in 1991. Now Sri Lanka is securing $2.9 billion assistance bailout from IMF. Okay, now IMF has provided this thing that if Sri Lanka wants to secure bailout from IMF, then the three biggest creditors of Sri Lanka has to give assurance for that particular thing. Now China, Japan and India. China, Japan and India. They are the biggest creditors of Sri Lanka, and they have to give their assurances. Okay. Now, first of all, if we talk about the IMF, guys, understand this thing. IMF is not like a developmental bank. It will not be lending money for specific projects as World Bank might lend. But fine, here IMF comes when there is a financial support BOP crisis that is there. Now the money that is given by IMF, it is conditional or contingent on certain economic restructuring that a country has to do. So basically they have to go for the restructuring. Now as we talk about that the IMF has provided that assurances have to be given. Now India has been the first country which has given the return financing assurance to IMF that IMF can give a bailout package to Sri Lanka, and as Minister of External Affairs has visited Sri Lanka, it is the part of this return assurances that they have given to deliver it. Fine, we have made this particular visit. So officially we are the first country which supported, and India had said that this step that has been taken by India, it is in pursuance of India's neighborhood first policy that has been there. Now other countries such as China and Japan has to reciprocate. Okay. Now, guys, understand this thing that as the Minister of External Affairs visited Sri Lanka, as a part of this particular visit, many other memorandum of understanding, cooperation pacts have been signed between India and Sri Lanka. Now, both the countries have provided that investment pact. Now, in both the countries, investment pact has been signed, where India is going to carry investment in core areas. These core areas are energy, tourism, and infrastructure. Moreover, both the countries have also signed on a principal agreement on renewable energy framework, and most importantly, high impact community development project. High impact community development project. On this project also, India and Sri Lanka had signed the agreement. Now, what is this high impact community development project? So this high impact community development project was agreed between India and Sri Lanka 3 years back, that is in 2020. And as a part of this particular HICDP project, India will provide assistance to Sri Lanka so that the Sri Lanka can develop the community projects, community assets. Fine. Now, what are these community projects and assets? For example, primary schools, colleges, vocational training institutes, universities, hospitals, fine facilities for rural sanitation, cultural heritage, preservation of cultural heritage, rainwater harvesting, social housing for poor, agricultural warehousing, tourism, civil aviation. So these are the basic community infrastructure facilities that Sri Lanka intends to build, and for that assistance will be provided by India. India will provide grant. Okay. Now this has been extended for 5 years. It has been extended for 5 years, and as a part of this agreement, as a part of this HICDP project, now we have signed a bilateral agreement. Fine. Now, further moving on, guys. So, as India is helping Sri Lanka, what Sri Lanka has promised in return? So, Sri Lanka has given an assurance that Sri Lanka will implement 13th Constitutional Amendment Act. Now, what is this 13th Constitutional Amendment Act? In itself, it is an important question for UPSC. So, basically, guys, we need to know little bit of history of this particular development. Okay. So, guys, first of all, you see this particular thing that basically a lot of Tamilian people were taken by Britishers to Sri Lanka for working on plantations. When Sri Lanka became independent, now guys, see this particular thing. There was one faction of people in Sri Lanka that were Sinhalese. Sinhalese. Now Sinhalese largely practiced Buddhism, and then other people were Tamilians. And we found this thing that newly formed government in Sri Lanka started to discriminate with Tamilians. Tamilians were treated as the second grade citizens in Sri Lanka. And because of that particular thing, what happened? Because of that particular thing, initially protests started, and when these protests were not heard, then violent protests started in Sri Lanka. Many of such organizations erupted, and one of them was Litte, that is Liberation Tamil Tigers LM, and they demanded that the Tamilians should be given their due share in Sri Lanka. They pressed for autonomy for the north and northeastern regions of Sri Lanka, where Tamilian people were living in large number. And because of this particular thing, what happened? Even the civil war got started here. Okay, now guys, now the civil war continued till 2009. It was a very long civil war. Now, as this particular crisis was going on in 1987, Indo Sri Lanka Accord. In 1987, Indo Sri Lanka Accord was signed by Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi and President J.R. Jayawardene. And as a part of this Indo Sri Lanka Accord, it was provided by Sri Lanka that they will give autonomy, they will come out with the reforms for Tamilian people. And therefore, 13th Constitutional Amendment Act was promised. 13th Constitutional Amendment Act was promised. What is this 13th Constitutional Amendment Act? It was provided that provincial councils will be created in the north and northeast where Tamilian people are living. Those regions will be given autonomy. A power sharing arrangement will be signed. The regions where Tamilians live, they will be given the power of self-governance. All these promises were given as a part of a 13th Constitutional Amendment Act. Moreover, subjects such as education, health, agriculture, housing, land, in all these particular subjects, autonomies will be given to the Tamilian people. Okay. Now this is guys something that happened, but actually there were a lot of issues with the implementation of this 13th Constitutional Amendment Act. Now Sinhali Nationalist Party, now see this thing, Sinhalese Nationalist Party, they said a lot has been given to Tamilians, but parties such as Litte, they said that nothing has been given. So one party say that too much has been given, they are unhappy. Other parties say that too little has been given, they are also unhappy. So because of this thing, all of them oppose the 13th Constitutional Amendment Act. Is it clear or not? This is something that had happened. Now guys, understand this thing, that though civil war ended in 2009, okay, but understand this thing, that even after 13 years, fine, even after 13 years of the civil war, we find this thing that first of all, 13th Constitutional Amendment Act did not got implemented completely. A lot of people who faced humanitarian crisis, who faced many of the attacks, many of the innocent people, the war crimes that happened during civil war, fine, the perpetrators of war crime, they have not been brought to justice. So these are all the issues, and guys, this particular thing still becomes a sensitive issue between India and Sri Lanka. Clear? So point is that guys, the 13th Constitutional Amendment Act, which promised a lot of autonomy, which did not got implemented, it will be implemented now as per the Sri Lanka. Clear? Now 13th Constitutional Amendment Act happens to be very important for, basically guys, understand this thing, Tamilians happens to be a very important segment of India, okay, and as the 13th Constitutional Amendment Act happens to be a very sensitive matter for them, so therefore for India it automatically becomes a very important, very sensitive matter, a matter of national interest. It happens to be a starting point for deep lasting relations, okay, which India expects that the Sri Lanka should be cooperating upon. Okay, so now Sri Lanka has given assurance that 13th Constitutional Amendment Act will be implemented. See, though these assurances have been given earlier also, but now we need to see that whether Sri Lanka walks the talk or not. So that is all guys about this particular development. So with this, we come to an end to the today's session. I hope you have understood it, and if you have liked, please do hit the like button, and please do write in the comment box as what you think, what should be India's next move and how this will be impacting India and Sri Lanka relations. Thank you so much.